Samuel and Eli, 1 Samuel 1 through 7. There was a man from Ramah of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. He had 2 wives. One wife, Hannah, had no children, but the other wife had children and made Hannah's life miserable. As the years went by, whenever she went to the temple of God, Hannah would weep and not eat. One day, when she was very sad, she prayed to God and said, "O Lord, if you will give me a son, then I will give him to you." As she silently moved her lips in prayer, the high priest, Eli, saw her and thought she was drunk. "How long will you be drunk?" he asked her. "Throw away your wine." Hannah said, "I have not drunk wine. I pour out my soul to God with bitterness of heart and a sorrowful spirit. I am not a wicked woman." Eli said, "Then go in peace, and may God give you what you ask." So she left God's house at Shiloh and returned home. Soon Hannah had a son, whom she named Samuel. She did not forget her promise to God, and when the child was old enough to be without her, she took him to Shiloh. She said to Eli, "I am the woman who prayed for a child, and see, God has heard my prayer. Now I give him to God to serve as long as he lives." She left Samuel there, and Samuel served God before Eli. Hannah and her husband, Elkanah, came once a year to sacrifice. Each year, Hannah made a new robe for Samuel and brought it to him. God blessed Hannah so that she had 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Samuel grew older, serving God, obeying Eli, and growing in favor with God and man. He worshipped God while Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, did not honor God nor serve him. They defiled God's laws and sacrifices. Eli knew the evil they were doing, robbing from the offerings given to God by all the people. But Eli did nothing to stop them because they were making him rich. This continued to anger God and the people. One day God sent a prophet to Eli and told him that because he had not stopped his sons, both of them would die on the same day. God did not talk to many people in those days, and visions were few. One night, as Samuel slept in the temple where the ark of God was, he heard a voice. It said, "Samuel." He said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli to see what he wanted. But Eli said, "I didn't call. Go back to bed." Samuel lay down. Again the voice said, "Samuel." So Samuel ran to Eli. "Here I am. You called?" "I did not call. Go back to bed." Yet again the voice said, "Samuel." This time when Samuel came, Eli realized God had called the boy. So he said, "Go lie down, and if God calls again, say, 'Speak, God, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lay down on his bed. Then God said, "Samuel, Samuel." "Speak, for your servant hears." God said to him, "Behold, I will do a thing in Israel to make everyone's ears tingle. Eli's sons will die on the same day because Eli did not stop them." Samuel lay until morning and opened the doors of God's house. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision, but Eli said, "Tell me." So Samuel told him. Eli said, "It is God's will. Let him do good." As Samuel grew older, God spoke to him again, so all Israel knew Samuel was a prophet of God. The Philistines and the Israelites met in battle, and 4,000 Israelites were killed. When they returned to camp, the elders asked, "Why did God let us lose? Bring the Ark of the Covenant so it may lead us into battle. Then we'll win." All Israel shouted when the ark arrived, making the Philistines afraid. They said, "God is in the camp. Woe is us. This is the God who brought them out of Egypt. Be strong and fight, or we will all become servants of the Israelites." There was a great battle, and 30,000 Israelites died. The ark of God was captured, and just as God had told Samuel, Hophni and Phinehas were killed on the same day. A man ran to Shiloh to tell Eli, who was worried about the ark being gone. He was 98 years old, a heavy man, and could not see. Eli asked for a report of the battle. The man said, "We lost the battle. Our soldiers were slaughtered. Your 2 sons were killed, and the ark has been captured." When Eli heard that the ark had been taken, he fell backward off his seat by the side of the gate, broke his neck, and died. Eli had judged Israel 40 years. The Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant to Ashdod, where they put it into the house of their idol, Dagon. But the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark. So they set the idol upright once more. The next morning, the idol was again on the ground in front of the ark. This time, its head and hands were cut off. God punished the people of Ashdod with tumors, so they cried out in despair and asked that the ark be moved. It was taken to Gath, where tumors again attacked the people. They sent the ark next to Ekron, and the tumors attacked those people too. The people said, "They have brought the ark of God around to kill us and our people. Send it back where it belongs." After suffering for 7 months, the Philistines sent the ark back, along with gifts of gold, molded into the forms of tumors and mice, for the mice had destroyed their fields. They put the ark on a cart, drawn by 2 milk cows. They said, "If the cows go toward the closest Israelite city, Beth-shemesh, then we will know God has been doing these things against us. If not, we will know they just happened." The cows went straight to Beth-shemesh, turning neither to the right or left, and the rulers of the Philistines, seeing this, returned home. The God of the Israelites had brought all those bad things upon them. The Israelites were out reaping their wheat when the cattle came to a stop beside a large stone in the field of Joshua. They split the wood of the cart to get firewood and offered the cows as a burnt offering to God. Next, they took the ark to the house of Abinadab on the hill and consecrated his son, Eleazar, to take care of it. It stayed there 20 years. Samuel told the Israelites, "If you remove your foreign idols and serve God, God will deliver you from the Philistines." They got rid of all their idols and gathered at Mizpah to sacrifice to God. The Philistines heard about it and tried to attack them. But God made it thunder so loudly that it confused and frightened the Philistines. The Israelites won easily. The Philistines left Israel alone during the days of Samuel. Saul becomes king. 1 Samuel 8-13. When Samuel got old, he set up his sons as judges. But his sons were wicked men, just like Eli's sons. The people said, "Your sons are not righteous and good like you. Appoint a king to rule over us." Samuel prayed to God, asking what to do. God said, "Give them a king. They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being their king." Samuel told the people, "If you have a king, he will force you to pay taxes. He will take your sons for his warriors and servants. He will take your daughters for cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and give them to his servants." In spite of this warning, the people said, "No, we want a king. We want to be like other nations, with a king we can see." Saul, the tall, handsome son of Kish of the tribe of Benjamin, was hunting for some lost donkeys. He and his servant stopped to ask Samuel if he had seen them. Before they said anything, Samuel said, "Come, eat with me today. In the morning you may leave. Your donkeys, which were missing for 3 days, have been found." God had told Samuel to do this. So Saul and his servant stayed. Samuel set Saul at the head of the table and gave him the best food. The next morning Samuel sent the servant on ahead. Then he anointed Saul king over Israel. He told Saul to come to Mizpah. Samuel called all the tribes of Israel together at Mizpah. He told them God had chosen their king. They cast lots, and the tribe of Benjamin was chosen. Then they cast again, and Saul's family was chosen. Then they cast the lots a final time, and Saul was chosen. But Saul was not to be found. Then God said, "He is hiding by the baggage." So they brought Saul out. He was a head taller than all the other men and more handsome. The people shouted, "Long live the king!" Then they all went home, including Saul. Some people thought Saul wasn't much of a king, but he gathered an army and, with God's help, destroyed the Ammonite army that was attacking the people of Jabesh. This great victory made Saul a hero, and all the people accepted him as their king. Samuel told the people, "Here is the king you asked for. If you honor God and serve God with all your heart, then God will bless both you and your king. But if you rebel against God, then his hand will be against you." Saul chose an army. He kept 2,000 men with him and sent 1,000 with his son Jonathan. The Philistines came with 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and a huge army. The Israelites saw them and ran away and hid in caves, cliffs, cellars, and thickets. Saul was waiting for Samuel to come and offer a burnt offering to God. Samuel didn't come, and Saul's frightened soldiers were starting to leave. So Saul disobeyed God. He built an altar and offered a burnt offering without any right to do so. As soon as he finished, Samuel arrived. Samuel said, "What have you done? You have broken God's commandment." Saul said, "You didn't come when you were supposed to. The soldiers were leaving, so I forced myself to offer this sacrifice." Samuel said, "You have done a foolish thing. God would have blessed you and made your kingdom continue on, but now he will give it to another." Jonathan's faith. 1 Samuel 13 through 14. The Philistines camped by the mountain pass of Michmash. Between the passes there were 2 sharp crags. The Philistines knew how to make iron, but the Israelites didn't. So the Philistines would not let the Israelites have a blacksmith who could work iron, for they did not want the Israelites to make swords and spears out of their farm tools. On the day of the battle, only Saul and his son Jonathan had swords. Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Let us cross over to the Philistine camp. Perhaps God will work for us. For it doesn't matter to God if we are a big army or just 2 people." But Jonathan did not tell his father Saul what he was doing. Jonathan said, "We will let the Philistines see us. If they say, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we won't go to fight them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will climb up, for God will be with us. This will be our sign." So Jonathan and his armor-bearer stood where the Philistines could see them. The Philistines yelled, "Come up to us, and we will show you something." Jonathan said, "Follow me. God has given them into the hands of Israel." So Jonathan climbed up, and he and his armor-bearer killed 20 men. Then there was an earthquake in the enemy's camp. As Saul's watchmen looked on, the Philistine raiders fled, fighting each other. Saul's army rallied, even those who had been hiding, and chased after the Philistines. There was a great battle. Now the men of Israel were having a hard time during the battle, because Saul had put everyone under an oath, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food today before we have conquered our enemy." But Jonathan had not heard his father. He ran through the forest, and when he saw honey on the ground, he dipped his staff in a honeycomb and ate and was refreshed. Then one of the men told him about his father's order. Jonathan said, "My father has caused us harm. See how much stronger I am with just a little honey. If our men had been allowed to eat, they could have had a major victory instead of a small one." At the end of the day, sheep and oxen and calves were slain, and the hungry people did not bleed them properly, but ate them with the blood. This was a sin, for blood is not to be eaten. Then Saul built an altar to God and asked God, "Shall I chase the Philistines more? Will you give them to us?" But God did not answer them on that day, so they cast lots to see who was to blame, and the lot fell on Jonathan. Saul decided that Jonathan must die as punishment for eating. The people said, "Must Jonathan die after God used him to bring this great victory to Israel? Far from it. He has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Saul disobeys God. 1 Samuel 15. As king, Saul led the army against Moab, Ammon, Edom, Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he led, the Israelites punished the wicked nations. Samuel said to Saul, "God wants you to destroy the evil country of Amalek as punishment for the way they came against Israel when the people left Egypt. Completely destroy all the people and animals. Do not spare anyone." So Saul took 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Judah and went against Amalek. He destroyed all that were there, except he spared the life of King Agag, and kept the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that Saul thought was good. He only destroyed the things he didn't think were worth keeping. God called Samuel, saying, "I regret I made Saul king, for he does not obey me." Samuel wept before God all night, then rose and went to meet Saul. Saul said, "Blessed are you of God. I have done the command of the Lord." "Then why do I hear sheep bleating and oxen lowing?" asked Samuel. Saul said, "The people kept the best so they could sacrifice them, but we destroyed the rest." Samuel said, "Let me tell you what God said. You were little in your own eyes, yet God made you king over this land. God sent you to destroy all the Amalekites, yet you did evil in God's sight and kept the good things you found." Saul said, "I did obey God. I utterly destroyed Amalek and brought back Agag the king." The people took some of the animals to sacrifice to God at Gilgal. This would have given them sacrifices that cost them nothing. Samuel said, "What would God rather have? Burnt offerings and sacrifices, or obedience? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice. Rebellion is like idolatry. You have rejected God's word, so he has rejected you from being king." Saul said, "Please forgive my sin and return and worship with me." Samuel replied, "No, you have rejected God, and he has rejected you." As Samuel turned to go, Saul grabbed his robe and it tore. Samuel said, "God has torn the kingdom from you today and given it to one who is better than you. God will not lie or change his mind, for he is not a man that he should change his mind." Then Samuel sent for King Agag. The king came cheerfully, thinking he had nothing to fear. But Samuel killed him, for Agag was a wicked murderer of men. Samuel went to his home at Ramah and did not see Saul again. Samuel mourned for Saul, but God regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel.
God chooses David. 1 Samuel 16. God asked Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul? Fill your horn with oil and go to the house of Jesse. I have chosen a new king among his sons." Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears of it, he'll kill me." God said, "Take a heifer with you and say you are going to sacrifice and invite Jesse and his sons. I will then show you whom I have chosen." So Samuel went to Bethlehem, where Jesse lived. He looked at Eliab, the oldest son of Jesse, and thought, "This must be God's choice." But God said to him, "Do not look at his face or his height, because I have rejected him. For man looks at the outside, but God looks at the heart." In the Bible, heart often means the thoughts and intentions of a person's mind. Samuel looked at 7 of Jesse's sons, and each time God told him that the son was not the one he had chosen. So Samuel said to Jesse, "Do you have any more sons?" "There's just one left. He's keeping the sheep." "Call him here, for we will not sit down until he comes." When David was brought in, he was ruddy, with nice eyes, and handsome. God said to Samuel, "Arise and anoint him, for he is the one." Then Samuel anointed David king in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of God came upon David from that day forward. At that time, the Spirit of God left Saul, and an evil spirit terrorized him. When his servants realized this, they sent for David, because they knew he was skilled at playing the harp. David became Saul's armor-bearer, and whenever Saul's spirit became troubled, David would play, and Saul would be comforted. David and Goliath. 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their army to fight Israel. Their champion, Goliath of Gath, was a giant of a man who stood 9.5 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and bronze armor on his body. Everything about him was huge and heavy. Every day, for 40 days, he challenged the Israelites to send a champion out to fight him. "If he can kill me, we will be your servants. But if I kill him, you will serve us." When Saul and all Israel heard these words, they were afraid. Now Jesse's 3 older sons were in Saul's army, but the youngest, David, went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. One day, Jesse told David to take food to his brothers and find out how they were doing. So David rose early in the morning, left the flock with a keeper, and went to the valley of Elah. He came to the camp as Goliath came out and yelled his challenge, "I defy the army of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." Hearing him, the Israelites fled. David said, "Who is this Philistine, that he defies the armies of the living God?" The people told him, adding, "Whoever kills Goliath will be given great riches by King Saul. The king will also give him his daughter to marry." David's brother, Eliab, heard David's question and said, "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be with the sheep?" David said, "What have I done now? I just asked a question." He turned away from Eliab and asked another man about Goliath, and got the same reply. Hearing about David's questions, Saul sent for him. David said, "No man needs to be afraid of Goliath. I'll go fight this Philistine." Saul said, "You can't go. You are just a youth, and this man has been a warrior since his youth." David said, "I tended my father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came out and took a lamb from the flock, I attacked it and killed it and rescued the lamb. I have killed both lion and bear, and this Philistine will be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord has delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from Goliath." Saul said to David, "Go, and may God go with you." Saul gave David his own armor, but it was too large. David took it off, saying, "I can't wear this." David took his staff and slingshot and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in his shepherd's pouch, and approached the Philistine. Goliath said, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Come to me and I'll feed you to the birds." David said, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of God, whom you have defied. This day God will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of your Philistine army to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all standing around here may know that God does not deliver by sword or spear. The battle belongs to the Lord. He will give you into our hands." Goliath stepped forward, and David ran to meet him. David put his hand in his bag and took one of the stones and slung it. The stone struck the Philistine right in the forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. David had no sword, so he ran up to Goliath and took his sword out of his sheath and cut off Goliath's head. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they ran away. The men of Israel chased them, killing them as they fled. David and Jonathan, 1 Samuel 18 through 22. Saul kept David as a warrior after Goliath's death. Saul's son Jonathan immediately liked David, and they became as close as brothers. The women danced and sang, "Saul has slain 1,000 men, and David 10,000. This made Saul very, very jealous, and he said, "What? Will he want the kingdom next?" So he watched David with suspicion from then on. As David played the harp for Saul the next day, Saul threw his spear at David, trying to kill him. Later, he tried again, but David managed to escape both times. Saul grew afraid of David, for he could see God was with him. Saul gave his daughter, Michal, to David as a wife. Saul made David a captain over 1,000 men. All Israel loved David. Even the Philistines held him in awe. But Saul kept trying to put David into situations where he would be killed. One day, Saul told Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. Jonathan said, "Why do you wish to kill David? He has done you no harm, but instead has killed your enemies. Will you sin by killing an innocent man?" Then Saul listened to Jonathan. There was another war with the Philistines, and David destroyed them. Saul was upset and once again tried to kill David with his spear, but David escaped, and the spear stuck into the wall. The next morning, Saul sent men to David's house with orders to kill him. But Saul's daughter, Michal, heard of the plot and told her husband to flee for his life. David fled to Samuel at Ramah and told Samuel all that Saul had done. He and Samuel went to Naioth to live. Saul sent men there to kill David, but God caused the men to prophesy. Saul sent another group of men, and the same thing happened. So Saul himself went to kill David, but God's Spirit made Saul prophesy all day and all night. This allowed David to escape, and he went to Jonathan. David asked him, "What have I done, that your father is trying to kill me?" Jonathan said, "No, he can't be. My father tells me everything, and he hasn't mentioned this." David said, "Your father knows we are friends, and hasn't told you. As God lives, I am but a step away from death. Whatever you want, I'll do for you." David said, "Tomorrow is the new moon. I'm supposed to eat with your father, but instead I will hide in the field. If your father misses me, you are to say, 'David asked to be excused to go to Bethlehem.' If your father says good, Then we'll know I'm safe. But if he is furious, then we'll know I must flee." So David and Jonathan went out to the field, and Jonathan said, "I promise to let you know my father's feelings. Promise me that you will not kill me or any of my household." And David promised. Jonathan said, "Wait 3 days, then go hide behind this stone. I will shoot 3 arrows like I'm target practicing. I will send a boy to go get the arrows. Depending on what I tell the boy, you will know how my father feels. May God be between us forever." The feast lasted for 3 days. On the 2nd day, Saul said, "Where is David? He wasn't here yesterday either." Jonathan said, "He needed to go to Bethlehem." This angered Saul. "Why are you friends with David? If he lives, he will be the next king. Not you. He must die." Jonathan said, "Why? What has he done?" Saul was so angry, he threw his spear at his own son. So Jonathan knew his father meant to kill David. Jonathan did not eat, but grieved for David. In the morning, Jonathan took a boy to the field. He said, "Run and find the arrows which I shoot." The boy ran, and Jonathan shot the arrows past him, saying, "Is not the arrow beyond you? Run quickly, do not stay." The boy gathered the arrows and brought them to Jonathan. Then Jonathan gave him his weapons and had the boy take them back to the city. When the boy left, David stepped out of hiding, and the 2 friends wept. They agreed that their families should be friends forever, and parted. Saul pursues David. 1 Samuel 21 through 23. To escape Saul, David fled to Nob, where Ahimelech, the priest, came out to meet him. Trembling, Ahimelech said, "Why are you alone?" "The king sent me on a secret mission," David said, telling a lie. "Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you have." The priest said, "I have no ordinary bread, only holy bread." "You may have that." Now Doeg the Edomite, a servant of Saul, was there that day. David saw him. David said to Ahimelech, "Is there a spear or sword here? I left in a hurry and didn't bring one with me." Ahimelech said, "Only the sword of Goliath." "I'll take that." At this time, David probably wrote Psalm 34. It tells how God hears the cry of the righteous and helps them out of their troubles. David went to the cave at Adullam. When his brothers and all in his father's house found out where he was, they went to help him. People who were in distress or in debt or just discontented joined David, so that he became a leader of 400 men. The men from the tribe of Gad also joined him. They were mighty men of valor, trained for war. The least among them was equal to 100 men, and the greatest fought like 1,000 men. A prophet told David to go to Judah. Saul heard about it. Doeg the Edomite told Saul that earlier he had seen Ahimelech, the priest of Nob, help David. Saul sent for the priest, saying, "You helped my enemy." Ahimelech said, "Who among all your servants is as faithful as David? I know nothing of this." Saul said, "You shall die." He told his guards, "Kill the priests of God for helping David. They knew he fled and did not tell me." But the guards would not kill God's priests. So Saul said to Doeg, "You kill them." Then Doeg slew Ahimelech and 84 other priests in Nob. There was only one survivor, Ahimelech's son Abiathar, who escaped to David. David said to Abiathar, "I knew that day when I saw Doeg there that he would tell Saul, 'My lie has caused the death of your father's house. Remain with me where you will be safe.'" David spares Saul's life. 1 Samuel 24. Saul found out that David was living at the stronghold of Engedi. So Saul took an army of 3,000 men and went after him. At Engedi, there was a large cave in the rocks, and David and his men hid there. Saul came into the cave, not knowing anyone was inside it, and sat down in the entrance to rest. David's men said, "Look, God has given your enemy into your hand." So David crept up to Saul and cut off part of his robe. Then David said, I shouldn't have done that. Saul was anointed king by God. So David stopped his men from harming Saul. David waited until Saul left the cave. Then David called out, My lord, the king! When Saul looked back, David bowed to him and said, Why do you listen to men who say I will harm you? God gave you to me in the cave. I could have killed you, but I will not harm you, for you are God's anointed. Look, here is part of your robe which I cut off, sparing your life. I have not sinned against you, and will not, though you hunt me. May God judge between us, and deliver me out of your hand. Then Saul said, David, is that you? You are more righteous than I am, for no one lets his enemy escape. I know God will give you the kingdom, so please do not kill me or my family. And Saul took his army and went home. David and Abigail, 1 Samuel 25. Samuel died, and all Israel mourned. A very rich man of Maon, named Nabal, was shearing his sheep in Carmel. David heard about it and sent 10 young men to him. The men said to Nabal, Good health to you. We are from David. While we have been in your area, we have protected your shepherds and sheep, so that nothing is missing. Therefore, please give your servants and David whatsoever you wish as a reward. They were right to ask this. But Nabal said, Who is David? I'm not going to give him a thing. David's men returned to him and told him what Nabal had said. Enraged, David took his sword, gathered 400 men, and started out. David said, It was foolish of me to watch over Nabal's men and flock. He has paid me back evil for good, so I will kill him and his men. In the meantime, one of Nabal's men went to Nabal's wife Abigail, saying, David sent some young men to us to bless our master, and Nabal yelled at them and was very rude. But these men were very good to us while we were in the fields keeping the sheep. They protected us day and night so that our flock was safe. Now what shall we do? For evil will come, and Nabal is such a worthless man, no one can speak to him. Then Abigail hurriedly gathered 200 loaves of bread, 5 butchered sheep, and other food, and put them on donkeys. She sent the food ahead of her and followed on a donkey. When Abigail met David, she dismounted and bowed to the ground, saying, Please hear me. Take no regard for Nabal. His name means fool, and he is foolish. Instead, blame me, as I did not see the young men you sent. May this gift of food, which I bring to you, be given to your men. You will one day be king over Israel, and you do not want the guilt of innocent blood on your hands. David said, As God lives, you have kept me from sinning, for I was ready to take vengeance with my own hand. David took what she had brought and returned to his camp, and Abigail went back to Nabal. Nabal held a great feast, like the feast of a king, and became very drunk. Abigail waited until the next morning to tell him what had happened. When he heard it, his heart died within him, and he became like stone. 10 days later, God struck Nabal dead. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he blessed God. David asked Abigail to marry him, and she did. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel for a wife. David takes Saul's spear. 1 Samuel 26 through 27. David was hiding in the wilderness of Ziph when he heard that Saul was hunting him with 3,000 soldiers. David sent out spies and learned where Saul had camped. David said, Who will go down with me to where Saul sleeps? His nephew, Abishai, said, I'll go with you. So David and Abishai crept into camp and found Saul sleeping with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abishai said to David, God has given you your enemy today. I'll kill him with one thrust of the spear. David said, No, no one can strike down God's anointed and be without sin. Saul will die when it is time for Saul to die. Take Saul's spear and water jug, and let's go." God had put Saul's men into a deep sleep, so they did not hear David and Abishai. The next morning, David stood on the mountaintop and shouted at Abner, the commander of Saul's army. "Answer me, Abner! What kind of guard are you over the king? You should die, you and your men, because you let an enemy into your camp. Look, here is Saul's spear and water jug." Saul said, "Is that you, David?" David said, "Yes. What have I done that you continue to hunt me?" Saul said, "I have sinned. I will hurt you no more. I have been a fool." David said, "Here's the king's spear. Let one of your young men come over and take it." David went away, and Saul went home. David said in his heart, "Saul will kill me one of these days. I will go to the land of the Philistines, and maybe I can find peace there." So David took his 600 men and their families to Gath and lived there. When Saul heard that David was out of his country, he stopped hunting for him. David asked the king of Gath if he and his men could have somewhere to live. Knowing that Saul was an enemy to David, the king gave them the city of Ziklag. Later, when the king heard a false report that David had raided in South Judah, he was happy, thinking that now David could never return to his homeland of Judah. But David had actually raided in the land of the Amalekites. The king of Gath decided to raid Judah and fight against Saul. He invited David to go along. David asked God to keep him out of the battle. God answered his prayer by having some of the Philistine commanders become afraid to have David along, especially behind them. They complained to the king, so the king said to David, "Now go back and leave us. Go in peace, that you do not upset all my commanders. Leave early at first light." So David and his men headed back to the land of the Philistines. Saul's last days. 1 Samuel 28 through 31. Looking at the huge Philistine army that had gathered against him, Saul trembled in fear. He sought advice from God, but God did not answer him. Saul found out there was a witch in Endor. So Saul disguised himself and went to see her. God had forbidden the practice of witchcraft, soothsayers, mediums, wizards, and their like. So when Saul sought out the witch, he was deliberately sinning. Saul asked the witch to call up Samuel from the dead. The woman called Samuel, and he came forth, scaring her silly because this had never happened before. Witches cannot really do anything they claim to do. When she saw Samuel, she realized Saul had deceived her. Samuel said to Saul, "Why do you bother me?" Saul said, "The Philistines are warring against me, and God has left me, so I called you to find out what to do." Samuel said, "Why send for me when God has left you? Because you did not obey his voice, he has given your kingdom to David. Tomorrow you and your sons will die, and the Israelites will lose the battle to the Philistines." Saul was terrified and fell to the ground and had no strength. Meanwhile, David and his men returned to their homes in Ziklag. They found the city burned and their wives and families captured by a raiding group of Amalekites. David took 600 of his men and pursued them. He had to leave 200 men behind at the brook Besor because they were too exhausted to cross it. As he chased after the Amalekites, David found a sick Egyptian servant who the Amalekites had left behind without food or water. David gave him water and food, and he regained his strength. The servant led them to the Amalekite camp, where a victory celebration was taking place. David and his men fought and won, and rescued all their wives and children, and everything else that had been stolen from their homes. When they went back, they came to the brook where the 200 waited with the baggage. Some of the wicked and selfish with David said, "Because these did not go with us, we will give them none of the spoils, except for their wives and children." David said, "Not so. We share alike, those who go to battle and those who stay behind with the baggage. Besides, God has given these treasures to us, and God has kept us alive, and God gave us victory over our enemies." As David passed through Judah, he sent spoils of war to all the cities in Judah that had given him aid, and told them, "Behold, a gift for you from the spoils of the enemies of God." The next day, the Philistines fought against Israel. They killed Jonathan and Saul's other sons. Saul could see that the battle was lost, and the archers were coming near. He was already badly wounded by arrows, so he fell upon his sword, killing himself. The Israelites fled from their cities, and the Philistines moved in. Saul and his sons were buried by the men of Jabesh Gilead. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel about 40 years.
David becomes king. 2 Samuel 1-5. An Amalekite came to David's home in Ziklag to tell him about Saul's death. He said, "I found Saul leaning on his spear with the Philistine army closing in. Saul was seriously injured, and he begged me to kill him, so I did. Your enemy is now dead, along with his son. I have brought you the crown from the king's head and the bracelet from his arm." David mourned for Saul and Jonathan. He said, "Kill the Amalekite, because he has killed God's anointed king." Before David took any action, he always asked God if he should do it or not. This is one of the reasons David was so special to God. After Saul's death, God told David and his men to leave Ziklag and go to the cities of Judah. David moved to Hebron. He was of the tribe of Judah, and they made him their king. In the meantime, Abner, Saul's captain, had made Saul's son, Ishbosheth, the new king over Israel. Ishbosheth ruled 2 years. There was a long war between the house of Saul, with Abner as captain, and the house of David, with Joab as captain. David's group grew stronger as Ishbosheth's grew weaker. Ishbosheth made Abner angry, so Abner switched sides, coming over to David. David asked Abner to bring back Michal, David's former wife. This Abner did, taking her away from the husband Saul had made her marry. After Abner met with David, he left to encourage the rest of Israel to make David their king. But David's captain Joab hated Abner because Abner had killed Joab's brother. Joab said to David, "Abner came to deceive you and spy on us." Joab later called Abner aside as if he had a message for him and killed him. David mourned for Abner since Abner was a great warrior. When Ishbosheth heard of Abner's death, he lost courage. Ishbosheth was in his bed when 2 of his army captains came and killed him. They cut off his head and took it to David, thinking they would be rewarded. Instead, David had them killed for murdering an innocent man. The rest of the tribes of Israel now proclaimed David their king. He was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years. He ruled for 7 years and 6 months in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem.
The prayer of Jabez. 1 Chronicles 4:9-10. During this time there lived a man named Jabez. He was more honorable than his brothers. Jabez prayed to God, "Oh, that you will bless me indeed and enlarge my border. May your hand be with me and keep me from evil, that it be not to my sorrow." And God granted him what he asked for.
David's mighty men. 1 Chronicles 11-12. David had men of all tribes join him who were mighty warriors of great courage. Jashobeam and Abishai, the brother of Joab, were among them. They each killed 300 enemy soldiers at one time by themselves. One time during harvest, 3 of David's mighty men were with him at the cave of Adullam. When David longed for a drink of water from the well outside Bethlehem, these 3 men went to Bethlehem, fought off the Philistine army that was camped there, and brought him back some water. David would not drink it. "Should I drink this, which is of the blood of men who risked their lives for it?" So David poured it out onto the ground as an offering to God. These great warriors did things like this continually. David takes Jerusalem. 2 Samuel 5-11. David went to Jerusalem to capture the city. The Jebusites who lived there taunted him, saying, "The blind and lame can hold this fortress against you." David was angry and said, "Whoever is the first to enter the city will become the chief of my armies." Joab led the men into the city and won the position of leader of David's army. They captured Jerusalem, and David made it his headquarters. It became known as the City of David. Then Hiram, king of Tyre, sent cedar wood and carpenters to build David a house. David said, "Let us bring the ark of God to Jerusalem." So they put the ark on a new cart pulled by oxen, with David and the others following along celebrating. As they passed the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled. The man driving the oxen, Uzzah, grabbed the ark to keep it on the cart. God killed him instantly, for only priests could touch or carry the ark. David was afraid of God that day, saying, "How will I ever bring the ark to Jerusalem?" He left it at the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. David prepared a place for the ark. This time he took Levites to carry the ark properly. So the ark was safely brought to Jerusalem. David appointed Levites to care for the ark there. David's friend Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth. Earlier, when Jonathan died, the child's nurse took the child and ran with him, fearing for his life. The boy fell and both his legs were crippled. When David heard that a son of Jonathan lived, he sent for him and gave him everything that belonged to Saul. David instructed Saul's former servants to care for Mephibosheth, and he had him eat at his table like one of his own sons. David had a nice house and wanted to build one for God, so he shared his idea with the prophet Nathan. He told him to go ahead and do it. But that night God spoke to Nathan and said, "Who am I to live in a house? Have I ever needed a house? Have I ever asked for a house? However, I will reward David. I will make his name great. I, God, will make a house, a family for David. I will raise up a line of kings. From this line, Jesus will come." Later, when David is dead, his son Solomon will build a house, a temple for me. David has killed too many people. There is blood on his hands. But I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. David's sin, 2 Samuel 11-12. One evening, David walked around the roof of his palace and saw a very beautiful woman named Bathsheba, who was taking a bath. He found out she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, a man of courage and honor, who was out fighting in the war. David sent for Bathsheba. Later she told him she would have his child. David sent a messenger to Joab, who was leading his army. "Send me Uriah the Hittite." Uriah came, and David asked him about the battle. Then David said, "Go home and rest." But Uriah would not go. He said, "Should I go home with my wife when my fellow soldiers are at war and camped in the field?" So David sent him back to Joab with a note. The note said, "Put Uriah in the front of the battle, and then draw back from him so he will be killed by the enemy." So Joab put Uriah at the point where the strongest defenders of the city were. When Uriah was killed, Joab sent the news to David. Bathsheba mourned her husband, then married David. They had a son. Their sin made God angry, and he sent the prophet Nathan to David. Nathan said, "A traveler came to a rich man who had many flocks. The rich man refused to eat one of his own lambs, but instead killed the lamb of a poor man. The poor man had only this one lamb, which he treated like a child." David was angry and cried out, "The rich man should be killed, but he should at least give back 4 lambs in return because he had no pity." Nathan said, "That man is you. God says, 'I anointed you king over Israel and kept Saul from killing you. I gave you all Israel and Judah and would have given you more. So why do you hate my word and do evil? You have killed Uriah and taken his wife. I, God, will raise up evil against you in your own house, and the firstborn son of Bathsheba will die." David said, "I have sinned against God." Nathan said, "Because you confessed your sins, you will not die. But your sin has given God's enemies an excuse to speak evil against him. Therefore, you will lose this child." David and Bathsheba's son became very sick. David mourned and would not eat nor be comforted. On the 7th day, the child died. David's servants hesitated to say anything to him, for they said to each other, "How much greater will David mourn now that the child is dead?" David saw them talking among themselves. He asked, "Is the child dead?" And they said, "He is dead." So David arose and washed and worshipped God. Then he went home and ate. His servants said to him, "What are you doing? While the child was alive, you fasted and mourned, but when he died, you got up and ate?" David said, "While he was alive, I fasted and wept, for I thought, 'Maybe God will be gracious to me and let the child live.' But now he is dead. Why should I fast? I shall go to him, but he cannot return to me." David comforted his wife, Bathsheba, and they had another son, Solomon. David promised Bathsheba that Solomon would be the next king. David's troubles. 2 Samuel 14 through 19. Absalom was one of David's favorite sons. He killed another of David's sons, his evil brother Amnon. Then he fled, staying away for 3 years. David mourned for Absalom while he was away, but refused to see him when he returned. After 2 years, Absalom sent for Joab. When Joab would not come, Absalom set Joab's fields on fire. He told Joab, "Get David to see me. Tell him, if there is sin in me, then let me be put to death. But get him to agree to see me." When David met with Absalom, he forgave him. Then Absalom plotted against his father, David. He went to the city gates, and if any man came with a problem for David to hear, Absalom would sympathize with him and promise justice if he were a judge. In this way, Absalom stole the hearts of David's people. At the end of 40 years, Absalom told David he was going to Hebron to sacrifice. Instead, he gathered people about him and had himself proclaimed king. When David found out, he fled Jerusalem, taking his household with him. Zadok, the priest, brought the ark with them, but David sent him back to Jerusalem with it. David said to Zadok, "If I find favor in God's eyes, he will bring me back. If not, then I will not return. I will wait at the river crossing for a message from you." Then David was told, "Your advisor, Ahithophel, is on Absalom's side. He will advise him now." So David prayed to God, "Please turn his advice to foolishness." God answered David's prayer through Hushai, a faithful friend of David, who agreed to stay behind and give Absalom bad advice. Absalom moved into David's house in Jerusalem. Hushai arrived there saying, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom said, "Why didn't you go with David? Is this your idea of friendship?" Hushai said, "Only the man whom God has chosen is my friend. I will serve him." This made Absalom happy. Absalom asked Ahithophel for his advice. Ahithophel said, "David and his men will be tired and weak. Let me take 12,000 men and pursue David tonight. The king will be easy to kill. We shall bring the others back here, and there will be peace in Israel." Then Absalom asked Hushai for his advice. Hushai said, "David and his mighty men are all warriors. They will have left the women and children in a safe place and lie in wait for you to pursue. Wait until you have an army which you can lead yourself. All Israel will back you." God had this advice sound best to Absalom because God wanted Absalom to be defeated. Hushai sent a message to David, telling him what was happening. 2 loyal men started off to David with the message, but were seen. Absalom quickly sent soldiers after them. The 2 men went to a house which had a well in the courtyard. They climbed down into it, and the women who lived there covered the well with a small pile of grain so no one could see the well. The soldiers came, looked around, then went on. When they failed to find the men, they returned to Jerusalem. The message got to David, and he and his followers had time to cross the Jordan to safety. When Ahithophel saw his advice was not followed, he saddled his donkey, went home, and hanged himself. With his people safe, David divided his men into 3 armies. He told each commander, "Deal gently with my son Absalom." They fought Absalom's men in a forest, and more men died because of the forest than by the sword. Absalom was chased. Riding fast, his donkey went under a tree, and Absalom's head caught in the branches. The donkey ran out from under him, leaving him hanging there. A man told Joab, and Joab asked, "Why didn't you kill him?" The man repeated David's command to protect Absalom. So Joab found Absalom and stabbed him in the heart with 3 short spears, then buried him in a pit in the forest. David's men rejoiced at the defeat of Absalom, but David mourned. "Oh, my son, Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Joab said, "You are turning our victory into mourning. You are shaming the men who fought for you. You love the one who hated you and hate the ones you should love? If you don't stop crying for Absalom, all your men will leave you." So David stopped crying and went to the city gates where all could see their king alive and well. David numbers his warriors. 2 Samuel 20-24. David and his followers returned to Jerusalem, but the people quarreled. David had to stop a rebellion led by Sheba. He sent Joab after Sheba, who fled to a city. When Joab started to destroy it, a wise woman stopped him and had the city give him Sheba's head. David decided to number his warriors. This was a sin, trusting in the number of warriors rather than in God. Joab said, "Why do you do this?" David insisted, so Joab counted the men. When David received the count, he thought, "I have sinned." He confessed this to God. God was not pleased with what David had done. He sent the prophet Gad to tell David, "Because of your sin, I'll give you 3 choices. 7 years of famine on the land, your foes chasing you for 3 months, or 3 days of disease." David said, "Let me fall into God's hand and not man's," so he let God make the choice. As a result of David's sin, a disease swept the land, killing 70,000 Israelites. God stopped the angel of death before it struck Jerusalem. The angel stopped at the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. The prophet Gad told David to go to the threshing floor and build an altar there, Araunah saw David coming and went out to meet him. "Why do you come, my king?" "To buy your threshing floor, to build an altar that the disease may be stopped." "Take what you want. Look, I give you the oxen for the offering and the yoke and threshing tools for the wood. May God accept you." David said, "No, I will buy it from you for a good price. I will not offer to God that which costs me nothing." So David bought it for 50 shekels of silver. He paid 15 pounds of gold for the surrounding land. He offered the wheat and oxen to God, and God answered with fire from heaven, which consumed the offering. Then the angel put away his sword. David said, "God's house is to be built here, on the threshing floor of Araunah." God had said David could not build it, but Solomon could. David named Solomon the next king and charged him with building the temple.
Solomon's reign. 1 Kings 1 through 11, 2 Chronicles 1 through 9. King David was very old, and one of his sons, Adonijah, said, "I will be king." So Adonijah called a group together, including Joab, and proclaimed himself king. He traveled about with chariots and soldiers. He held a feast, but he did not call Nathan the prophet, Zadok the priest, his brother Solomon, or even the mighty warriors that were loyal to King David. And he did not tell his father, David. Nathan, however, knowing what Adonijah was doing, said to David, "You must tell the people who will rule after you, for Adonijah has proclaimed himself king." David said, "Take my son Solomon and Zadok and the mighty men and anoint Solomon king at Gihon. Blow the trumpet and say, 'Long live King Solomon.'" When they did this, all the people rejoiced. The people at Adonijah's feast said, "What is all the shouting about?" The priest's son came to them and said, "King David has made Solomon king over Israel." David sent him on his own donkey to Gihon, and Zadok and Nathan have anointed Solomon king. All the city is rejoicing. This is the noise you are hearing. Then all the guests of Adonijah were afraid and fled from him. Solomon sent this message to Adonijah: "If you show yourself worthy, you may live, but if you behave wickedly, you will die." David was about to die, so he commanded his son Solomon, "Be strong and prove yourself a man. Keep the commandments of God that you may be successful in all you do." David warned Solomon to watch out for Joab, who had murdered both Abner and Amasa. David then died. He had been king over Israel for 40 years. Next, Adonijah tried to trick Solomon out of the throne, so Solomon had him and Joab put to death. Solomon put Benaiah, one of David's mighty men, in charge of the army. Solomon's kingdom was now strong and peaceful. Then Solomon went to Gibeon to sacrifice. There God appeared to him in a dream. God said, "What would you wish for that I might give you?" Solomon said, "You have shown my father your loving kindness. I am but a child in the middle of a great people. Please grant me wisdom to judge between good and evil." God was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom and not for riches, long life, or the ability to conquer enemies. God said to Solomon, "Because you asked for wisdom, I will give it to you. There never has, nor never will be anyone as wise as you. And because you did not ask for riches or honor, I will give them to you also. And if you will walk with me and keep my commandments, I will give you a long life." Solomon awoke from the dream, knowing God had spoken to him. One day, while Solomon sat judging his people, 2 women came to him. One woman said, "Oh, my lord, I and this woman share a house. We both had a baby 3 days apart. During the night, her son died, and she switched her dead baby with my live one." The other woman said, "No, her son is dead. The living child is mine. Then King Solomon said, Bring me a sword. They brought him a sword, and he said, Cut the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other. The child's real mother said, Oh no, my lord, give her the baby. Do not kill him. The other woman said, It will not be yours or mine. Cut it in two. Solomon said, Give the first woman the living child. Do not kill him, for she is the mother. All Israel heard of the king's judgment and feared the king, for they saw that he had the wisdom of God. Solomon ruled over all the land between the Euphrates River and Egypt. His land had peace and was secure. In the 4th year of his reign, he started to build the temple for God. Hiram, king of Tyre, a good friend of David, sent cedar and cypress trees out of Lebanon for the temple. Solomon spent 7 years building the temple. He started construction 480 years after the Israelites had come out of Egypt. The temple was beautiful, made of cedar and covered with gold. It was shaped like the tabernacle, with a holy place and a most holy place. All the stones and carvings were done elsewhere, so no sound of hammer or axe was heard at the building site. The temple was the most beautiful building in all the land. When the temple was done, they put the ark and the other vessels inside it. Solomon gave a speech and prayer of dedication. Later, God spoke to Solomon a second time, saying, If you keep my law, then I will establish your throne forever. But if you or your children stop following me, then I will cut off Israel from this land. This temple will become a pile of rubbish. All will say, God has forsaken them because they left him. Solomon built many other buildings. He had a navy of ships at Tarshish and also one on the Red Sea in the land of Edom. They brought in gold from Ophir, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. When the queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's wisdom, she came to find out for herself if it were true. She arrived in Jerusalem with a great train of camels and spices, gold, and precious stones. She asked Solomon all her questions, and he answered her. She decided that his wisdom and wealth were even greater than she had heard. She said, Blessed is the Lord your God, because the Lord loved Israel. He made you king to do justice and righteousness. Solomon took in huge amounts of gold each year. He had a throne built of ivory and covered it with gold. King Solomon became greater than all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. He is thought to be the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, and most of the Proverbs. Yet, Solomon did have one problem. Solomon loved many foreign women. God had said, You shall not marry them. Solomon did marry them and built altars for their idols. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. When Solomon was old, they turned his heart away from God. The kingdom is divided. 1 Kings 12, 2 Chronicles 1 through 9. When Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart away from God. This angered God, and he determined to give half of Solomon's kingdom to Jeroboam, Solomon's servant. God sent his prophet, Ahijah, to meet Jeroboam as he walked in a field. Ahijah had on a new robe, and he tore it into 12 pieces. He gave 10 pieces to Jeroboam, saying, You will rule over 10 tribes. Later, Solomon died, and his son Rehoboam became king. The people asked him to lighten the burden that Solomon had placed on them. The older men who had advised Solomon said, Make it easier for the people. But Rehoboam asked the younger men, What shall I do? They were greedy for riches far greater than Solomon's, so they said, Make things harder on everyone. Rehoboam followed the younger men's bad advice. He answered the people, saying, I will make your burdens even heavier. My father rules you with whips. I will use scorpions. Rebelling, the 10 northern tribes left him and chose Jeroboam as their new king, as Ahijah had foretold. They called their new country Israel. Rehoboam gathered men to fight them, but God told him, "Go home. You shall not fight with your brothers." Jeroboam builds 2 altars, 1 Kings 12 through 15. The children of Israel traveled each year to Jerusalem to observe certain feasts. Jeroboam became afraid that the people would leave him once they traveled to Jerusalem to worship God. So he made 2 calves of gold and put one at Bethel and the other at Dan, saying, "Here are your gods which brought you out of Egypt." In this way, he caused Israel to greatly sin. He even appointed priests who were not Levites. Jeroboam went to his altar to burn incense, and a man of God stood there. The man cursed the altar, saying, "One day Josiah, a son of David, will kill the false priest and burn their bones upon this altar." Jeroboam put out his hand toward the prophet, saying, "Seize him!" His hand became paralyzed, and he begged the prophet to heal it. The prophet healed Jeroboam's hand, but refused his offer to eat with him. God had told the young prophet not to eat or drink, nor return the same way he came, so he left the king. As the young prophet got near Bethel, an old prophet came out to meet him. The old prophet said, "Come home with me and eat. I am a prophet, and the angel spoke to me. He said, 'Bring him back into the city, that he may eat and drink.'" But the old prophet lied to him. The younger prophet went with him, disobeying God's command. After they had eaten, the old prophet said, "You will die for disobeying." As the young prophet returned on his donkey, a lion killed him and stood by the body. The lion did not kill or eat the donkey or tear the young prophet's body. So the old prophet rode out and got the body and buried it in his tomb. He told his sons, "Surely the things the prophet said will all come true." King Jeroboam's son became very sick. Ahijah said to Jeroboam, "God exalted you among the people, yet you did evil. You set up idols and caused the people to sin. Therefore, from now on, when any of your family dies in the city, the dogs will eat them. And if any die in the field, the birds will eat them. None will have a proper burial. But as for your son, when you go home and enter the city, he will die. He will be given a proper burial with honor. He is the only person in all your house that has done one good thing for God."
Elijah and King Ahab. 1 Kings 16 through 18. When the kingdom was divided, Omri, the wicked king of the 10 northern tribes, made Samaria the capital of Israel. All of Israel's kings were bad, while some of Judah's kings were good. The worst of Israel's kings was Omri's son, King Ahab. He did more things to make God angry than all of Israel's kings before him. His wife, wicked Queen Jezebel, encouraged him to even greater evil. Elijah the Tishbite, a prophet of God, said to Ahab, "Because of your evil, there will be no rain in the land until I say so." This made Ahab want to kill Elijah. To hide him from King Ahab, God sent Elijah to the brook of Cherith and told him, "I have commanded the ravens to feed you." The ravens brought Elijah bread and meat both morning and evening. He drank water from the brook until it dried up. Then God said, "Go to Zarephath in Sidon. I have a widow there who will feed you." Elijah went to Zarephath and found a widow gathering sticks. He called, "Please bring me a little water to drink and some bread." She said, "I do not have any bread. All I have left is a little flour and oil. After my son and I eat it, there will be no more left, so we will soon die." Elijah said, "Fear not. Feed me first, then your son and yourself. God has promised that you will never run out of the flour and oil until he makes it rain." She did as Elijah asked. Elijah stayed with them, and they always had food to eat, just as God promised. Then the widow's son got sick and died. Elijah carried the boy to the room upstairs and prayed, saying, "O Lord, my God, let this child's soul come into him again." Elijah stretched himself upon the boy 3 times. The boy suddenly came back to life, and Elijah gave him to his mother. She said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God. The words you speak are from God and are truth." After 3 years of no rain, God sent Elijah to Ahab. When Ahab saw him, Ahab said, "You troubler of Israel?" Elijah said, "You are the troublemaker. Now call the Israelites to Mount Carmel with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Elijah challenged the people by saying, "How long are you going to keep limping between the 2 sides? If the Lord is God, follow him. If the idol Baal is God, follow him. The prophets of Baal will build an altar to Baal, and I will build an altar to God. We will each put an ox on it for a sacrifice, but we will not light the fire. The God who answers by fire, he is God." The people agreed. All went to watch the contest at Mount Carmel. Elijah said, "You are many, so you go first. Call on your God to light the fire." Starting from early morning, the false prophets called out, "O Baal, hear us!" They leaped about their altar. At noontime, Elijah mocked them. "Cry louder! He might be thinking, or on a trip, or maybe he's asleep, and you have to wake him up." They cried aloud and cut themselves until the blood poured from them. They did this until evening, but there was no answer. Then Elijah called the people to him and fixed God's altar, rebuilding it with 12 stones, 1 for each tribe of Israel. He dug a trench around the altar, put on the wood and the ox, then had water poured upon the ox and wood and into the trench, so that all was drenched. Then Elijah prayed out loud, "My God, let it be known today that you are God. Turn their hearts back to you." Suddenly fire fell from heaven, burning up the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, and licked up all the water. The people said, "Jehovah is God," and fell down, worshiping him. The false prophets were put to death. Next, Elijah went to the top of Mount Carmel and prayed for rain. He sent his servant to look for a rain cloud. The first time, his servant saw nothing. He did this 6 more times. On the 7th time, the servant said, "I see a cloud, as small as a man's hand." Elijah said, "Hurry! The rain is coming." He gathered up his robe and fled before the cloud. God gave him the speed to outrun Ahab's chariot down the mountain. The sky blackened and rain poured down. Then the seasons returned to normal. Elijah was just like us. Yet he prayed, and it did not rain for 3.5 years. Then he prayed again, and it rained hard. God comforts Elijah. 1 Kings 19 through 20. King Ahab told his wife, Queen Jezebel, all that Elijah had done on Mount Carmel and how Elijah had killed the false prophets. Jezebel became enraged and sent soldiers out to kill Elijah. He ran for his life to the wilderness near Beersheba and sat down under a broom tree. He said, "I've had enough, God. Take my life." He lay down and slept. An angel touched him and said, "Rise up and eat." Right before him was fresh, warm bread and plenty of water. He slept once more, and the angel woke him again. "Eat, for the journey you must take will require much energy." After eating the second time, Elijah journeyed for 40 days on the strength of that food. He ended up at a cave in Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, where God had given Moses the 10 Commandments. Then God asked him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah answered, "I have worked hard for you, but the children of Israel have turned away from you and have torn down your altars and killed your prophets. Now I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me too." God said, "Go and stand upon the mountain." A great and strong wind blew, breaking up rocks, but God was not in the wind. Then an earthquake shook the ground, but God was not in the earthquake. Next came fire, but God was not in the fire. Finally, a still small voice came. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out to stand in the entrance of the cave. God said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah gave the same answer, that he was all alone and that the queen was trying to kill him. God said, "Return by way of Damascus and anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Anoint Jehu king of Israel and Elisha to be prophet in your place, for there are 7,000 in Israel who have refused to bow to Baal." When Elijah found Elisha, he was plowing with 12 pairs of oxen before him. Elijah threw his mantle over Elisha. Elisha followed Elijah to become the next prophet. Later, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered 32 kings and went to war against Israel, surrounding the city of Samaria. He bragged to Ahab, saying, "By this time tomorrow, your silver, gold, wives, and all you own will be mine." Ahab said, "Let not the one who puts on his armor brag like the one who takes it off." A prophet came to Ahab and said, "You must attack the invaders. God will deliver this enemy into your hand." Ahab gathered 7,000 men and 232 rulers and attacked in the middle of the day. Ben-Hadad and the 32 kings were drunk, so they fled, giving the Israelites a great victory. Later that year, Ben-Hadad said, "The God of Israel is a God of the hills and mountains. If we attack them on the plains, we will win." So they attacked Israel on the plains and lost again, because God was fighting for the Israelites. Ben-Hadad escaped and sent word to Ahab asking for mercy. Ahab said, "Is he alive? Ben-Hadad is my friend." Then Ahab took Ben-Hadad in his chariot and made an agreement with him. Because Ahab had not destroyed Ben-Hadad, God sent a prophet to Ahab. But first the prophet went to another prophet. "Strike me," he said. "It is God's will." But the other refused. The first said, "Because you have refused to obey God's word, a lion will kill you." As soon as that prophet left, a lion killed him. The first prophet found another prophet. "Strike me!" This one wounded him, as he had asked. Then the wounded prophet disguised himself and waited for King Ahab to go by. He cried to the king, "I was in the middle of the battle, and a man said to me, 'Keep this prisoner. If he escapes, you will pay with your life.' And as I was busy here and there, the man was gone." Ahab said, "You have judged yourself. You will die." The prophet removed his disguise and said, "You have just judged yourself." God says, "Because you have let Ben-Hadad go, whom I, God, told you to destroy, you will pay with your life." Then King Ahab went home pouting. Naboth's vineyard. 1 Kings 21 through 22. King Ahab decided he wanted a vineyard in Jezreel, but it was owned by Naboth. Ahab said, "Give me your vineyard. I want to make it an herb garden because it is near my house. I will give you a better vineyard, or I'll pay you for it." Naboth said, "I cannot do that. God has forbidden us to sell the inheritance of our fathers." Ahab returned to his house and sulked. He lay down on his bed and turned his face away and wouldn't eat. His wife, Jezebel, said, "What's wrong?" When she heard about Naboth, she said, "Aren't you the king? Cheer up. I'll get the vineyard for you." So she wrote to the elders of the city, saying, Proclaim a fast, and sit Naboth at the head of the people. Have 2 evil men falsely accuse him of cursing God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death." The men of the city did as Jezebel commanded. When Naboth was dead, she told Ahab, "Naboth has been stoned and is dead. Go ahead and take the vineyard." But when Ahab went to the vineyard, there was Elijah. Elijah said, "Do you kill and take over? God says, 'In the place where the dogs lick the blood of Naboth, so will they lick your blood. And the dogs will eat Jezebel in Jezreel. God will bring a great evil upon you and your house.'" Hearing this, Ahab tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and fasted. God saw how Ahab had humbled himself, so God said, "I will wait to bring the evil on Ahab's house after he is gone." 3 years later, Ahab joined with Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, to fight against the Syrians. They asked the prophets whether or not they would win. The false prophets, 400 of them, said they would. But God's prophet, Micaiah, said, "I see Israel scattered as sheep without a shepherd, a people without a leader. Don't go to war." Ahab didn't like this prophecy, so had Micaiah thrown in prison and said, "Don't let him out until I return safely." Ahab disguised himself as a soldier and went into battle, but an arrow hit in the gaps of his armor, and his blood flowed into the bottom of his chariot. He died, and the men washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria, where the dogs licked the blood as God had said. Ahab had reigned 22 years over Israel. His son, Ahaziah, ruled in his place.